Okay, I just mangled something. I was trying to say yes. Somebody was asking on the Facebook thing. Yes, do you take call and stuff? Yes, you can type in questions. And I was typing, and then I realized the intro to the show was about to run out, and I had to switch over to this feed. And so I mangled something that I typed. I don't even know what I typed at this point. So I'm just gonna blame it on autocorrect, and no one will ever know. That's our secret. All right. So here we are, off the cuff Saturday edition that we've been doing here the last few weeks. Leroy and I have been doing at least. And this week we are joined by Jane Pantig, and she is here with me again after our solo interview, like 2 weeks ago now, Jane?
Oh, it's like a month ago when I was on the show, wasn't it?
Oh, man. Well, this pandemic, it's got you can't figure out time.
I think Joe is freezing.
He's frozen.
Uh-oh. Am I frozen? No, I can hear you guys.
You were frozen.
Uh-oh. No, we're live. We're still good. I'm giving you a thumbs up. So we're experimenting. Hopefully folks can see this. My wife is out there listening, hopefully, and she can tell me if it's not working. But right now, we're all live. Can you hear me, guys?
I can hear you.
All right. Well, if I'm frozen, don't worry.
I can hear you. Yeah.
My stream is still live. It looks like it's going out live, so we're good. So all these techno issues.
All right.
And so, hey, well, let's go on forward, and hopefully it's looking good for everybody on the viewer side. And I'll just say this, too, for viewers looking on. So we're going to hopefully be able to take your questions on Facebook. One of the things about streaming there is it's convenient because we can do questions live. You can type them in. But we've noticed some issues with watch parties and people looking from other pages. My wife just texted and posted, says, it's working. Yes. So, yes, it's working. My wife says, yay. So, and so we're good with that. So, but anyway, so sometimes questions in different places seem to not come through by Facebook. I don't know why. So we're going to do our best to respond. If we're not getting to a question, it might just be because we haven't seen it, and I'm still blaming Facebook at this point because I don't know any other reason not to blame them. So that's kind of where we're at. So, all right. Well, hey, today, we want to look at this idea of college and young people, and when they're entering in that, some of the challenges they face based on their faith or on their worldview and where that conflict lies. So I want to set the stage a little bit, and we'll get into that and look at some quotes and some issues. I have a couple articles that I want to bring up, and I know you guys might have some quotes or some articles you want to bring in as well. But before we do that, anything fun, newsworthy, or interesting that we should start with in your lives that you want people to know about this week? Anything go on well for you guys? Jane, you look deep in thought.
Life has just been the same for the past month or so. So nothing really new. Staying at home all the time.
Yeah.
It's pretty normal now.
Yeah. Well, here in California, at least. Now, I know yesterday a bunch of states opened up, like half the states opened up. So, who knows what that'll look like. So anything for you, Leroy?
No, every day seems like Sunday.
Yeah.
Every day runs into each other. We have to continually ask ourselves, so what's today again? Is it, yeah, that day. Every day seems the same day.
It's all mushed together.
Yeah. I mean, because there's the normal features that kind of structure our lives are like gone. Thrown out of the window, so every day seems like Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's better than everything seeming like Monday. So there you go.
Yeah.
You know what? I wouldn't mind a Monday today. I wouldn't mind a Monday today.
Yeah, that's true. I think we're all ready for the Monday to get back to work and do those things. So the rest of you not in California who are free and don't have the things that we have in lockdown in California, feel sorry for us. But we're still locked in our homes.
Yeah, very sorry for us.
Yeah.
Because the weather is beautiful, and we're gonna have another heat wave, and
Oh, I know.
Well, I don't know. They don't want us on the beaches where we should be.
Yeah.
Right.
At least in San Diego, they opened up the beaches here. Did they not open up your beaches up in Orange County, LA area, Jane?
Well, I think Gavin Newsom had shut them down, and then, there was a protest yesterday, so I don't know if he's going to change his mind on that. I don't know. We'll see. I need to go Google and find out what the latest news is.
It's funny. I saw a newspaper. A guy on his Facebook thing had this. There's two newspaper articles side by side, and one was from like Pensacola, Florida, and one was from like up in LA somewhere, but they both had the same image, and it was like people are crowding the beaches again, but it was the exact same photo that they used. So like
somebody got caught.
Yeah. Some reporter was being lazy. They didn't want to go.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's a whole different state. Like, could you at least get, at least the one in that state?
Yeah. It's crazy times we live in. All right, so hey, let's I will say actually before I start. So our drama this week was our oldest went into ER, ended up with appendicitis. So it's just sort of been crazy for us this week, and everything else in life going on. I'm just glad that kids sometimes they just don't think about the impact they have on parents. It's like really inconvenient that he allowed the appendicitis to happen, had to go to the hospital, all the time that I lost caring for him and doing all that stuff. Blah, but Dad, it's about me. I had surgery. Whatever, kids. But
well, I'm a kid, so I'm probably the one causing the trouble.
we're all somebody's kid. When I'm sick, I still call my mommy. But she's an RN, so I also get her advice too. So
get a medical professional's help.
I do. I've had an on-call nurse my entire life. Other people now are like phone into the doctor. I'm like, psh, who hasn't done that? So, all right. So, hey, let's look at this. So I want to look at some worldview, and I want to kind of set the stage about the challenge. And what I think a lot of families don't realize is how different colleges are, even in Christian, historically Christian universities, how different the worldview is often from the faculty or just the administrative environment. And it's certainly there's differences depending on which school. Some might still, in terms of Christians, be a little bit more traditionally Christian focused, but it's really changing even in what we'd think would be mainline or evangelical seminaries and Christian universities, and it's changing very quickly. So I kind of wanted to set the stage of some of that worldview and kind of at least say what I think some of that is, and then you guys can maybe jump in with a few thoughts. But let me do that by giving you a quote and then just a few little fun news article facts that I think for me set that stage. So here's this great quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And somebody compiled a bunch of quotes of his that he talks about stupidity, but I think this is one of the good ones that I thought. It says, quote, "It seems obvious that stupidity is less psychological than a sociological problem. It is a particular form of impact of historical circumstances on human beings, a psychological concomitant of certain external conditions." In other words, he's talking about like a personal psychological response to their environment that creates this sort of, another quote talking about this, like not just in the individual, sort of like a stupidity and an inability to process information, but then it impacts externally and then it creates a culture, a sociological problem. But it starts with the individual, which I think is his kind of the key part of his observation. And to kind of, so Bonhoeffer here is writing this decades ago. And I have a couple of salient quotes that we'll see how they come in. But I wanted to pair that with this study that I read, just to highlight it. It said this: more than half of liberal philosophers are willing to discriminate against conservative philosophers in hiring, and in just under half, so not quite half, but just under like 40 to 48% I saw, in publishing papers, awarding grants, and invitations to speak. Now, it was interesting because conservative philosophers were given the same survey, and they said no, they wouldn't discriminate. They'd happily invite these sort of liberal philosophers to their stuff to publish their papers. So it's really only the one side, and that happens a lot. Of what parents and young people have to realize is that when they come into these academic institutions, they're not about the free expression of ideas, and we'll kind of touch on that later too. It's about controlling the information they get to sort of almost indoctrinations. And one example I saw of this was, and I just want to share with you guys, and then we'll see what you guys have to say. A Rutgers professor. Her name is Brittany Cooper. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but I use this because it's interesting because this is a state-funded institution, and this woman is a sort of a black feminist. What is? I mean, she's got a lot of things. She's like black philosophy or thinking, feminism, and there's a bunch of other stuff she used to describe herself. But she said this in a recent tweet: "I feel like most black people are clear that this is utterly absurd to push to reopen the country. Is all about a gross necropolitical calculation." Now, we'll look at that word. A necropolitical calculation that it is black people who are dying disproportionately from COVID. So in other words, on Twitter, she's saying people want to reopen because they hate black people and they're trying to kill black people. And this is the way that the culture has of killing off black people, is to reopen the country. So there's that word necropolitics that came up, which I was like, okay, I have no idea. I mean, necro is dead, politics, but it's this sort of politics of death, I guess. But I had to look it up.
Yeah.
And I found a book published by Duke University. Now, I wanted this because I picked on Rutgers, which is a state-funded university, from a woman who argues that Jesus was queer or married to a prostitute and has all kinds of religious beliefs that she's free to espouse, paid by the state. But in a book published by Duke University, which is a school, by the way, founded by Methodists and Quakers, so it's historically a Christian university, there's a book, and the title is Necropolitical. And if you want to understand that word, it's basically this. You got to think Marxist ideas meets Michel Foucault in philosophy. That is his sort of redefinition of human sexuality and race through the concept of power. And so he actually mentions Foucault in his thing in the book. So what do you guys think? I mean, that's what I'm looking at this worldview in terms of you've got this philosophy that's undergirding it that is closed off to certain ideas, and it's also one that's really closed to any sort of engagement legitimately with historic Christian faith. Does that make sense to what you guys are seeing in terms of the general atmosphere within the university system?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with race now, but it's just an interesting conclusion for her to say it's because they want to kill black people. I think, to think about why people want to open the economy, and I don't think it's to kill black people. I think if that's a worldview lens that you're using to explain that, then that could make sense. But I think it's bigger than that. I think it's because people need to just get back to work, and we need to get our economy going. And I don't think it has anything to do with killing off a particular race.
Yeah, but for that person, if you remove the whole race concept from the discussion, then you actually have to deal with the actual facts, which is like, what's the risk factor that we all have to take every day? How are not just black people going to provide for themselves or be cared for, but for poor white people? I think whenever we listen to the race discussion, we get it so wrong. There are only 36 million black people in America. America's 335 million people. 36 million of those people are black. There are 44 million poor white people in America. 44 million. That means that there are more poor white people in America than there are black people in America. So when these conversations, I think, have more power and more, they take up more space than they ought to when we consider, the overall discussion. It's not about race. It's how are people going to eat? How are people going to provide for themselves? How are they going to provide for their families? 30 million people went on unemployment last week. That's all going to cascade. I mean, that's 30 million individuals, but those individuals, many of them are connected to other individuals like children. It is just an insane point of view. It's just a one-sided and insane point of view, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's other factors as to why we should open. Like, people's mental health is not great right now. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and they said this was kind of when we first went into lockdown, they said 300% increase in volume of calls.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's other things that are going on besides this virus. It's like people are not doing well mentally. There's just so much depression and anxiety. And I think people being locked at home is not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess, the reason I thought that was a timely illustration to use of what I was thinking about is because we can see playing out before us where, this worldview that's guiding, I think, a lot of education. And this lady, that's the prof for Rutgers is not an isolated person. I mean, I've heard this kind of stuff in many places from many people. But they learned how to deal not with concepts and ideas. They learned how to dismiss ideas based on slogans and based on sort of different little bumper sticker ideas of how the world works, and those control it. Matter of fact, I'll go back to Bonhoeffer really quick because I like this one. He said, "The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he speaks on behalf of an empowered group. In conversations with him, one feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans and catchwords that have taken possession of him." And that's kind of, I think, the challenge here. It's not so much what her view is on that, hey, we want to get rid of this to harm black people and stuff. It's just there's the catchword. The catchwords are, this is anti-black, or this is, whatever it could be. This is going to destroy the environment. There's these slogans that we have to work into everything, and everything controls that. And once you have the slogan, you have to fit the facts into the slogan some way. It's got to make it into the narrative. So I think that's generally the way that thinking is unfortunately happening on the college campuses. So I don't know if you guys read, there was a law professor named Adam McLeod, and he wrote this sort of letter that it was published in a couple places, but it's what he does in the introduction to his law students. He's been around with teaching a lot of millennial students, I guess, in his view. And I don't think I want to just pick on poor millennials. I think there's a lot of people that this applies to, but that was his take on it, at least. And he says this, it's really interesting. He says, quote, "Before I can teach you how to reason," okay, this is his first challenge. And this is one of the first challenges I think I'd want to look at for college students. So I think parents, if you're looking at how do I prepare my kid for college, or if my kid's in college, it's not too late. But I think the first challenge is learning how to reason, learn how to use logic and make the world make sense. Instead of teaching them, this is what we believe. I mean, it's not that you shouldn't teach what to believe, but then take them, okay, how does that belief apply to the world? I guess is the point here. But he says this, and I'll quote, and then you guys jump in after this quote. He says, "Before I can teach you how to reason, I must first teach you how to rid yourself of unreason. For many of you have not yet been educated. You have been diseducated. To put it bluntly, you have been indoctrinated. Before you learn how to think, you must first learn how to stop unthinking. Reasoning requires you to understand truth claims, even truth claims that you think are false or bad or just icky. Most of you have been taught to label things with various isms, which prevent you from understanding claims you find uncomfortable or difficult." He goes on, "Disagreement is not expressing one's disapproval of something or expressing that something makes you feel bad or icky. To really disagree with someone's idea or opinion, you must first understand that idea or opinion." How do you respond to that?
Well, he's right. he's right. I think we get various examples of that kind of thinking when we talk to our friends, when we talk to fellow students, and from a church perspective, in which they come to seminary with a set of ideas that they learned at church, not necessarily bad, but they don't know why they believe those ideas. What they've done is they've adopted a particular view that may in and of itself be right, but isn't really undergirded by knowledge. And part of the task when you go to seminary or school is to, cut through that. Does that make sense? Cut through that and get to and understand the whys rather than the what's. And I think he's 100% right. I think that's indoctrination, if you will, but it is also, I think, I don't know that it's not as bad in a freshman student. It's bad in a senior or a junior or something like that who hasn't really begun to, deal with issues and work their way through them.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of this is just my experience. I never was given the tools to reason or critically think. And I think that's why we can't really think about things that people tell us. And we don't ask more questions about it. It's just, okay, this is it, and that's it. And if you do ask questions, like in the church context, they're just like, oh, just believe it. So I think that's really bad for the church too. But I didn't take a logic class until I got to grad school. So, and I went to public school all my life. And so as I'm going through grad school, learning about fallacies and critical thinking, I'm just like, I have committed all those fallacies over my lifetime, and nobody's ever called me out on them because nobody's ever learned them. And so, like, I'm a millennial, so I've gone through life where we just go back and forth and people aren't correcting anybody because they don't have the tools to correct people with. So
yeah, and I think that I think what jumped out to me too is like the idea that somehow we can correct information with our feelings. In other words, it's just sort of like, well, that makes me uncomfortable, therefore it's wrong. And we become triggered. And so triggering defines what is right and wrong. And it doesn't matter what somebody's intent was or not in saying something. If a guy says to somebody, if I say to you, Jane, oh, Jane, you look lovely today. So, but if Jane, you take that as a, you've decided I'm going to file a sexual harassment lawsuit. Well, first you'd be in trouble because I don't work. No, it's like, there's nobody to complain to, really. I guess you just wouldn't come back to my show. Yeah. But you get the idea. It's like, it's like then that becomes the truth. That becomes the reality. And I could say, well, no, I just thought, hey, whatever. I'd say something nice, give a compliment, and you come from a different worldview where that's not an offensive thing. And then you get this clash of worldviews, and then reason goes out the door. You can't sit down and say, well, I meant this, not this, and say, well, it doesn't matter what you meant because what I feel, that made me icky, therefore it's truth. And I think that's part of the challenge that he kind of describes there. Yeah. So, hey, let's look at this. This is interesting. So I think that first challenge, again, is that there's a challenge of learning to reason. And the ability not to do that is, I'm looking here online. Yeah, we got, I think this is a friend of yours, Jane. Is it Ravello? I don't know if I'm saying his name right.
Oh yeah, that's Casper. I think his name is spelled backwards. So yeah, Casper.
Oh, okay. Oh,
maybe. He was on your the session that we had with you on Monday.
Oh, okay.
He was in the audience. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, he's commenting away here like that, and he's got a lot of agreements here. I'll pop up a couple of his comments here or there. He probably can't even see this depending on what he's watching, but people that watch the video archive later will see some comments pop up on the screen and some other things like that. So So that's one of the cool things about the video archive. They get to see the comments. I'm able to show those on the screen for people, so it's kind of cool. But yeah, keep posted away. We're glad to hear those comments. But so the inability to think and reason, I think, is one of those first hurdles, that we have to deal with. And from McLeod that he brings up, I thought the second one, this is interesting. I think he brings out that there's a challenge of denying there's an external reality. And so I think students are faced with this thing that the reality itself becomes, again, my experience, my thinking, the way I feel becomes the reality, and ultimately leads to the denial of any sort of ontological truth or being out there. And before I get to McLeod's thing, I like another Bonhoeffer quote. I just thought these were great, and I like quotes that are old because they're outside of our cultural context. Nobody can say, well, Bonhoeffer wrote that because he is opposed to COVID, or he's outside of our cultural issues. He's long since dead. So that's always interesting to get that outside our own culture perspective and see what we can learn. But he says this: against stupidity, we are defenseless. Facts that contradict one's prejudgment simply need to be believed, and when facts are irrefutable, they are just pushed aside as inconsequential or incidental. For that reason, greater caution is called for when dealing with a stupid person than with a malicious one. What jumps out about that quote before I even look at McLeod? What do you think guys think of that quote?
I think he's when he says stupid, I think he means religious. I really think that he's arguing about someone who is not thinking, but is just believing, articulating a faith position. That's what I think. That's what I think he means. This person is articulating a faith position, and they're articulating it in such a way that it can't be challenged. Because to challenge it is to challenge their feelings, their person, their very existence. I mean, I think we've heard that over the last few years from particular groups. That to challenge their ideas is to challenge their identity, their very existence. Yeah. It's violence.
It is, yeah. Well, relativism is the thing on campus. Nobody thinks truth exists, and you're not going to be able to tell people that truth exists unless you're actually having a conversation about truth. And once you kind of have those conversations, like we can't even talk about this stuff if truth doesn't even exist. Like what is our standard? Where do we start? And just working with a lot of university students, I think they're starting to realize, well, I really can't say that if there isn't any truth. And so it's just really interesting. And they don't, and they want to say everybody's ideas are equal. But then when you have somebody who's claiming something they don't like, then they're just like, oh, well, yeah, no. So it's like, but you don't have a standard. So it's like, my idea is just as valid as yours. It's because you don't like it. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's tough because, like Bonhoeffer points out, it's this idea that people just find a way to dismiss if you put a sort of an irrefutable fact or whatever, as he calls it. People just say, well, that's inconsequential. It doesn't matter. Or, today it's like, I like what he says because, when you read stuff today, we have an ism to put around it. And that ism will just make that fact, irrelevant to the conversation because you impugn a motive, you impugn something to it, or the person giving the facts or information. Therefore, that's an easy way to push stuff aside. And so McLeod, he says this in his article. He said, first, telling students things like rules for his classroom. He says, first, except when describing an ideology, you are not to use a word that ends in ism. Communism, socialism, Nazism, and capitalism are established concepts in history and the social sciences, and these terms can often be used fruitfully to gain knowledge and promote understanding. Classism, sexism, materialism, cisgenderism, and yes, even racism are generally not used as meaningful or productive terms, and at least as you have been taught to use them. Most of the time, they do not promote understanding. You guys think he's off the mark? What do you think? I like that, but you're free to be wrong and disagree.
No, I think he's dead on the mark. This guy named James Lindsay called it island epistemology. In other words, it's a particular viewpoint that works in a particular place for a particular group of people that bounds up a particular dogma. He called it an island epistemology. So what this guy is literally saying is, communism, capitalism, and socialism are useful terms. But when you get to the other isms, their general use is to segment off or to bound up a group and protect them. So if I call you, Joe, a racist, Joe, you racist, you.
Oh, that's hurtful, Leroy. Oh my goodness.
I know, but the moment that I label you a racist, right? The conversation ends. No, there's really nothing more to discuss because what I've done is I've labeled you with a particular viewpoint that is not really an intellectual viewpoint, but is one that is particularly bigoted and whatever.
And by the way,
but it's not meant to further conversation.
Yeah, and that I was just pointing out, we get some comments here, saying like, labeling Christian views as hate speech just de facto. If you're a Christian, if you have a biblical view that is defined as hate speech, therefore you can't say anything, relate to that. So it just sort of comments here on Facebook, the same kind of thing you're saying, Leroy. Jane, what were you going to say? What do you think about that?
Yeah, all of those isms stop the conversation. We have so many students who would just say capitalism is the problem. The end.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just like, can you expound on that a little bit? And you don't get too much more after that. So it's just, I think they're just told these things that these are the problems, and that's the only conclusions that they can draw without actually explaining why capitalism is the problem. So.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of key, because when people really dig into this and look and study what's going on, the idea that, especially racism being the big ism that I think is used so much right now, is that, well, capitalism is rooted in racism. This gal I quoted, the Rutgers professor earlier, she even talks about how time itself is racist. The idea that time is linear. The concept of linear time, she suggests, is racist, because, for Black people, the Black experience, we have to look back, and we can't escape our past, and we have to remember our past. And so she's sort of equivocating on terms, of course, there, and not really being very clear on what we're meaning different things about that. But she's, and now you can find schools that talk about mathematics is racist, because it's rooted in Western thinking. And Western thinking, we all know, is white people, therefore it's racism. And so you look at all these things being done, and that ism of race is really, as soon as you make that point, oh, well, capitalism is rooted in racism, say, oh, well, you won the argument. That's all you need to say. It's that you just put it there. It doesn't matter. That's a complete non sequitur in terms of there's no logical argument presented. And any fact, you say, well, what about this? What about the fact that capitalism has, I think brought like 50 million people out of poverty globally in the last decade or something like that, some huge stat. I've been reading some stats on that. And say, well, that's in all nations, not just white European ones. It's all these things. He said, well, they find a way, like Bonhoeffer said, to dismiss that information because it doesn't fit with the worldview. And that's the challenge, I think.
Yeah, the Christians are exhorted to always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that's within us, and we're exhorted to do that with gentleness and meekness. I think that separates the Christian faith from the viewpoint that you're describing. We're exhorted to go deep in our faith. We're exhorted to think about it, to challenge ourselves, and to express those ideas in such a way that they bring good order. They bring peace. And we're not afraid of questions. We're not afraid of difficult questions. But what the people you're describing is they don't really want to have a discussion. They really want their views protected. And in that way, I think it acts just like a religion. It acts just like a religion, because for some religions, you never question their dogmas, because to do so is heresy. So the moment that you question their viewpoint, you're a heretic, and you know what happens with heretics? They're to be burned at the stake. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
and what's important about that, Leroy, too, is just that, even just pausing there for a second, people not realize when you're saying it's religion, you're making a distinction there between that and the historic Christian faith, where, when Thomas doubted that Jesus had resurrected, when Jesus showed up again, he said, hey, you're an idiot. You didn't believe. And this is what they told you. Why aren't you believing? He said, no, touch my hands, touch my side. He allowed him to doubt, and he allowed him to verify that it was real. So he wasn't mad that he questioned. Doubting Thomas always gets a bad rap for being doubting Thomas. But you could also call him Thinking Thomas. He's like, wait a second. I mean, come on. Really? I mean, that doesn't make sense. And so, sure, he wasn't ready to just accept their word for it. And then he found other evidence, reasons that he could believe what was shared with him. So I think what you're saying is not, when you say religion, just so some people listening may not realize, you're not saying religion as in Christianity is a bad thing. You're saying religion when it's used to in a sense that dogmatism can never be doubted or questioned, and that can happen in a secular context or an atheist context or a Christian context.
Sure, absolutely. And and in a sense, I'm not using it in a derogatory way. What I'm simply saying is they are guilty of the same thing they accuse us of having religious faith. The difference between our faiths is that we want people to question what we believe. I mean, that gives us an opportunity to share what we believe. If you were to question their dogmas, if you will, that's violence. You're strangling me, you're killing me, is what we've heard them say. So in that way, I'm not saying that religion is a bad thing. I'm just saying that they're articulating a faith position, which they would deny vigorously to their deaths. But they're articulating a faith position, one that cannot be questioned, because to do so is to threaten their very being.
Jump in, Jane. What do you say? Do we still have you, Jane?
You guys are cutting in and out, so I kind of missed what he.
It wasn't important. It was only what Leroy was saying.
No.
That's all I got.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was really good.
No.
No.
The part I said was really good. The part Leroy said was, Mine
has to be better, but I don't know what you guys talked about.
Yeah, it was. But what we're getting at is it's really good though. It's very, very interesting, and the major point is not one that should be, taken lightly. I think that's really the issue, is because if we're to look at the totality of their belief system, they have rules that if you were to just lay them out alongside Christianity, they would function very much the same way. So, for example, to deny Orthodox Christianity is to be, is heresy, right? For Christians. Well, to deny Orthodox whatever belief you espouse, for them is to be heresy. For Christians, we would say to be born again is to believe. I mean, to believe in Christ. For them, to be woke is to be born again. Does that make sense? So for them, the woke experience is the being born again into that particular woke worldview. And when you begin to lay these things out, they are functioning very much like a religion, with one major distinction: you are not allowed to question their viewpoints. And I think that's what Bonhoeffer is getting at. I mean, it's just very clear that it's a very interesting perspective if you really see it. They're just functioning like a religious worldview. It's just that you can't question them, and to do so, they'll do violence. That's what Antifa does.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, and actually we got a comment here that says talked about when we were talking about those other views that dismissing it, and the comment was simply faulty logic. I just mentioned this. Okay, so I had the chance to talk with Nancy Pierce yesterday, and she had a great interview with her, and talking about transgender issues and those sort of things. And she, we this idea of logic came up. And what was interesting is that, if you read a lot of the literature, especially in the area of gender studies, you're seeing a lot in this idea of the logic is not logic, it's logics, plural. And the idea of logic itself is believed to be a form of Western patriarchal, race imperialism. So just how it's so logic, when you say, well, that's faulty logic, you're not thinking this through. They're taught to believe that just you saying that is a form of intellectual oppression. And you're only saying that because you're trying to oppress them from believing what they're going to believe. And so it's logics plural. So, that logic works for you, but that's not my logics system. And there's this plurality of it. And so, this is the framework that students are stepping into from our homes. If you're raising them to think through, and like Leroy was talking about, that's the challenge that they're going to face, is that these professors are going to be speaking to them about a worldview where there's logics. There's no such thing as logic. It's logics. And the logic you probably are familiar with, student, that you're using to criticize me is a form of Western imperialism meant to oppress. I don't know. Have you run into that much with the students, Jane, where you're at? Because you're on a lot of campuses up in LA. So,
Actually, I've not run into anybody who gave me that problem. I think they actually appreciate us teaching them logic because they've never heard of it. They're like, how come I never knew this?
Oh, that's good.
The law of non-contradiction is very, very helpful.
Right.
So I haven't run into that, but now that I know about it.
Yeah.
There's a famous discussion of a South African panel where the panelists were fighting for I believe it's called animism, and witch doctors.
The nature worship kind of stuff that's dominant in a lot of African religions, right? Yeah.
To be equally held in the same view as logic, so that the South African people who order their lives according to those pagan worldviews and religions ought to be able to order their lives against Western, what they would call Western thinking or Western reasoning. So if they wanted to, believe that, the rain god, then that was equally valid as the law of non-contradiction on the panelist view. Can you imagine what that does to a group of people? That sets you back, hundreds of years. It's insane.
Yeah, look at this next thing that McLeod brings out. So one of the other areas of that he thinks students get is not just their ability to reason, and it's not just the idea of this challenge of there's, the idea of an external reality. He says that there's a real problem with moral confusion. And he says this, quote, you have been taught to resort to two moral values above all, diversity and equality. These are important values if properly understood, but the way most of you have been taught to understand them makes you irrational and unreasoning. For you've been taught that we must have as much diversity as possible, and that equality means that everyone must be made equal. But equal simply means the same. So to say that 2 + 2 = 4 is to say that 2 + 2 is numerically the same as 4. And diversity simply means difference. So when you say that we should have diversity and equality, you are saying we should have differences and sameness. That is incoherent by itself. Two things cannot be different and the same at the same time in the same way. And so I think what he's driving at, in the math, there is that, if we're arguing that diversity is great, well, diversity means that there will be things that are different. And so if there's different, we can't use that word, the idea of equality, to mean sameness, which is often, I think, what he's saying is happening there. Equal, if I have $20,000 of income, you must have $20,000. If I have $50,000, you must have $50,000. If I have, 3 outfits of clothes, you have to have 3. And if I have 5, I have to give you 1, kind of thing. But if everything's the same, then, that's different than diversity. So he argues about that. But what do you guys think about that moral challenge within the college framework? What do you think is the challenge really facing students as they enter that college environment? And silence.
Ponder that one. So Leroy, take it away.
And silence fell over the crowd. Leroy's trying to be a gentleman today. Normally he would just cuss you off, Jane. He wouldn't even care what you had to say. That's the kind of guy.
I would just go into it.
He would just go in. But see, this is your first time on with us, so he's being genteel and kind. Not at all the Leroy I know.
I know. But it is a solid, it's a solid point. It's a solid assessment. One of the most difficult things, unless you've really studied how to, present the moral law in a discussion or an argument, it's hard to pierce that bubble, simply because those kids generally frame their world by that emotional, perspective. One of my favorite sayings that we're hearing all the time now is, this is not who we are. This is not who we are. We are not like this. But nobody ever defines, who we really are. it's one of those vague statements that people make that leave it up to anyone to say, yeah, whatever who we are means to me. In the same way, when we are having moral discussions with kids, to challenge them morally challenges who they are. It challenges who they are and what they believe about the world in the most personal way. So I can imagine, Jane, if you're on a college campus and you're talking to kids about the moral law and how they frame their lives morally, you probably get a lot of pushback on that because they're going to reject the view that you are espousing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't like moral absolutes, but once you have conversations with them, and they'll start saying things like, well, capitalism is wrong and all these kinds of things, and it's like, but you said nothing can be wrong, so how can you even say that is wrong? Mm-hmm. And then they're just like, oh yeah, like I can't really say anything is wrong if there really isn't any wrong there isn't any truth, and so they gotta think about that a little bit more.
Yeah. I remember, and this is not new, I remember when I was on the campus at Penn State doing my undergrad many, many years ago. This is back in the 90s. See, I'm an old man, Jane. So
that was a long time ago.
But I was out having a conversation with this guy in this sort of public thing where people had challenges. And he was like, Christians, evil, whatever. And I don't even remember how I got into it. But, of course, anytime you get into the following discussion, Hitler has to come up because everyone has to use that as the whipping boy for everything. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I said, look, explain to me this. If there is no right and wrong, then you can't say that what Hitler did was wrong to kill 12 million people. And he said, well, and this guy I respect because at least he was honest. He's like, you're right. It's like, I can't say that he was wrong. I could say that he's wrong for the way we view the world today, but maybe in his time, in his way, what he did was okay. And I was like, what? I'd never heard such a thing. I mean, I didn't even understand. I hadn't studied reason and logic. It just sort of I was an engineer, so that comes by us naturally. But, because, if this beam does this, then it can't do, sort of you think through those things. And but I just had never heard somebody, I didn't even know what he was saying. And I remember getting so mad at this guy. I was like, so dude, you're telling me that there's no right or wrong. Yes, there's no such thing. I said, so if I were to punch you in the head right now and knock you cold on the ground, you would say that wasn't wrong. He's like, well, I would say that it was bad for me, but it's not say bad for you. And he was committed. He was all in.
He was like, I just didn't like that you punched me in the face, but it's okay.
It's not wrong. It's just
There was a guy last week on television who was being challenged on his view of China, and I've never seen a person more tone deaf and more not in touch with what he was saying. So literally, the questioner asked him, was it okay if they locked these sick people in their houses and left them to die? And the guy literally says, well, that isn't what we would do here, but for them, the most important thing for their country is that what happens to the most people. So if 100 or 200,000 people were locked in their homes to die, on his reasoning, it was good as long as it benefited the most people. But he said it so openly and without any guile whatsoever. It was probably one of the most shocking interviews I think I've ever heard on television. I mean, I couldn't really wrap my mind around that you're literally saying it was okay to kill 200,000 people just because it's going to benefit the most people. Well, that's insane. But, he was committed to it. And he wasn't ashamed either. Wasn't ashamed. That's the part I think I found most stunning.
Yeah. I was just looking, we have some good comments here coming on, and just this idea that, morality is often determined by the majority, which is interesting, but it's, I think that comment itself is interesting because it's determined by the majority of the of the minority who is not in power. It's right. Sort of the irony of it. It's like the tyranny of the majority is what people say, well, just because, white Christian males have the majority, they shouldn't be able to determine what's right or wrong. But when it gets flipped, now it's like, well, now we're the group in power, so it doesn't. There's an irrationality of it because sometimes it's the majority, sometimes it's not. But it doesn't. it doesn't cohere in a sense. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Why that conflict seems to come? I don't know. And in the case of
it's incoherent.
Yeah. I think that's why it gets so murky, I think, when you're in these discussions and talking to people, is that the argument changes based on the need of the goal. So they're trying to get to a goal to say, Christian bad. So if I'm going to get to that goal, I can use any kind of logic for the convenience of that argument at that moment. And you can't make that, whatever I'm using in this argument, you can't apply that to the argument I made 2 minutes ago, because that was a different way of getting to the same goal. Jesus evil, God morality, truth bad, and that's what I want to get to. So they've got those like bumper sticker slogan ways of viewing the world, like Bonhoeffer's talking about. And no matter what, they're going to get there. And I think that's what people have to start to realize. And so, like what I do with my kids, with my boys, because I got 3 boys, 1 in college now. And I try to, when I see these things like newspaper articles, I think this is one of the things that I want to encourage people to do. Like when the stories like we talk about here and bring up and some of these news stories, talk about these with your kids that are sitting around a table. Start saying, hey, I read this in the paper. What do you think? What do your friends think about this? What do you think about this? Just start to learn how they're processing information, and then just start asking them the questions. And I think it's when you haven't been indoctrinated yet, which most kids haven't, they will naturally gravitate to these laws of logic and reason. I was like, well, gosh, if that's true, then I guess this can't be true. So that makes sense. The problem is if they haven't learned that to be intentional about that by the time they get to college, they can be indoctrinated to deny A is not non-A. And so you can have the law of non-contradiction be a white supremacist, nationalist, Western, misogynist, logics, because they haven't learned to process when they're capable. So this is not, I really don't think it's that hard to overcome this kind of stuff. You just have to get to it before there's that indoctrination that takes place. What do you guys think? Does that make sense what I'm saying to you guys?
Yeah, I think there's still a little bit of hope. I think just having these conversations where students actually can trust you. I mean, it's like in the context of relationship, you can have really great conversations with people. It's not like, you can't just have this with a stranger, there has to be some kind of trust. And so that's why we have so many young people coming back to us all the time, because they genuinely want to learn. And the ones that don't want to won't come back. Yeah. So we're just going to take the ones that actually want to have a conversation.
I think Nancy Pearcey said something in the talk yesterday that she's the second person that I heard say something similar, which is that one of the things that we have to do is be really good at telling our story, giving our message. And there's going to be some, like in Acts 17, some are going to hear and believe. Some are going to say, I need to hear you again on this, and some are going to walk away. And I think we need to be okay with that. I was also thinking of something that I did in 4th and 5th grade with 4th and 5th graders, and I call it the table and chair. And the whole goal is to ask them to tell me what is a table and what is a chair. Now, I know that the kids are going to describe the table and the chair according to function. So if you ask a kid, what is this? They'll say a table. And then you ask the next question, well, why is it a table? They'll say, because you write on it. So then I'll sit on the table. And then I ask them, what is this? They say a chair. And they'll say, I said, why is it a chair? Because you sit on it. And then I'll write on the chair. So then what you've done when you do that is you're showing them that there's a real difference between what a thing is and how a thing functions. And I use that quite efficiently to get to one point. And that point is, a thing is what it is because of the one who created it. But a thing can function and opposite of its creation according to its own dictate. So we are who we are because of the way God created us. But we can function contrary to the way God created us because we have a measure of freedom. So, but once you get them to see those distinctions, then the rest of the gospel message, in my opinion, is because you've taught them in that moment the law of non-contradiction without actually explaining to them what it is. And from that moment, I think you can just scaffold truth. You can just continue to hang truth until you can really begin to grow disciples. And like you said, it has to happen early, because once they get to high school, it's a whole different ball game. I mean, and once they get to college, it's a whole different ball game, because that person now you need to practically overturn that person's world, and that's a lot harder at that point.
What do you say, Jay? Oh, I want to bring you in, Jane. Let me read this last, because I want to use that Leroy's comment to transition to our kind of summary kind of things here, and I want to get to the solution of the problem, which Leroy just was talking about really well in terms of that Christian worldview. I'll use one last quote from Bonhoeffer. It says this: he says this, the Bible's words that the quote fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom teaches us that a person's inward liberation from foolishness and decision to live responsibly and intelligently before God is the only real cure for stupidity. So this idea that I'm going to live, in this liberation, I'm going to be liberated from foolishness because I'm going to live responsibly and intelligently before God. And I know, Jane, you have all these conversations. Matter of fact, our comment here was like, have more Ratio Christi groups on your campuses. Is one way to solve these problems. But
yay!
But I think that's Leroy touched on this, and that conversation with Nancy is about the same thing. Is a lot of times we don't want to we can't get hung up in battling against something because we've never made the case for what our even truth is that we're talking about, who is God, who is the author of our perfecter of not just our faith but of our reality. He's our creator, he's the designer. And I think if we get past that, we get lost in the woods, and then we lose the argument because we're not really doing it on even ground with them. So what do you think, Jane? What's your big takeaway? How do we address this and use our faith as a tool against some of these things? And parents, how can they prepare their kids with our faith in Christ?
I think parents need to articulate their faith a lot better and just be okay with their kids asking them lots of questions. Like, I think most of the problem that I face on college campuses with ex-Christians is that they had these questions about their faith, but they didn't have a place to ask it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. I tell parents, I think one of the things that the church has failed to do, and maybe COVID will help this because parents are actually engaged, is because everything is age segregated ministries. We kind of send our kids off to their age segregated group. They never see us worship. They never see us sorrow. They never see us grieve. They never see us doubt in our faith. And I'm trying to shield the kids from this, and I don't want them to doubt. So they don't know the things we've gone through as families, and I think they have to see the suffering we experience, the doubts and the fears, just emotionally, just personally. Because then when they go and they experience their own doubts, they think, well, my parents never faced this, so they can't even understand me. We've never built that relationship that they can trust us, that we understand the questions and we understand the doubts. And so I think that's part of it, is what you're saying, Jane, too, is that we've never modeled it to them. And maybe we've done that because we're afraid of, letting them see it, or maybe because we just are afraid of the questions themselves. I don't know, but either way, they've got to see it before. So you're totally right in that, the role that parents have for bringing that wisdom. All right. Any last thoughts on where we go? I'll have a comment online. Here more churches have more apologetics taught, and questions and open to children, and questions to question and answer times with kids. I think churches, that's one of those things. You're right on this for the comments, is that we need more churches that'll not just do apologetics and per se. It depends what people mean by that, but I think more engagement, question and answering. Like Jane, we did with your group the other Friday or Monday. What's that, Leroy?
That they would teach apologetically. I know exactly why you made the kind of caveat that you made, because people think that the answer is in apologetics, and I think in a large way it is, but it's not in the way that people think. It is when we're preaching in our messages that we are challenging, in a very well-reasoned way the worldview and positions of the day. I mean, the scripture lends itself to that, and we also teach apologetics. We also teach kids to think. That's got to be a part and parcel of everything that we do in the church. I mean, I know that a lot of pastors are just fearful that they're going to, birth the monster apologetics ministry. But, We need that now. We may need that right now. So,
and I think another thing, apologetics, like sometimes it's too heady for people, and that's probably why they're scared of it. I think for us apologists, we have to understand how to explain it to them in a way they can understand it and grasp it, because sometimes it's just too philosophical. So we need to translate that to the regular church-going person.
Yeah, and that has to happen in dialogue. That's the kind of the key is like, there are brilliant philosopher thinkers, Christian reasoners who give great topics and talks and lectures. And those have a place, but the reality is what we need is, we can have 10, 20, 30 of those people, and that's great, whatever. What we need is 1,000 people who are capable of understanding those things and are willing to go and sit down for the hours that it takes over the weeks and over the months and over the years to have the conversations that have to go with that knowledge. And I don't have time to do the Greek study here. I use it in one of my classes that I taught when I would teach apologetics, was that we misunderstand that Greek word completely. It's not just about logic and reason. Paul, go look it up. Every context that it's used, it always comes with not just knowing something, but showing something. He'll say, this is truth. How do you know it's truth? Because we lived it among you. He always ties it back to the affirmation of the knowledge of the truth of Jesus Christ has been demonstrated. So it's not just taught, it's a demonstrated truth. And apologetics is never divided in Paul's usage from living it out in front of people. And we just can't do that in a talk. So again, I'm not dismissing the value of the talks and the lectures.
No, not at all.
I'm just saying that those aren't really biblical apologetics. I think biblical apologetics, Jane, is like what you're doing on the campus. You're with students week in and week out, and your ability to influence is way more significant than a William Lane Craig or a Moreland. Mass respect for all they do, but I just think being in a place with somebody, parents, you have more power over your kids than any of these colleges ever will. Don't waste it, is I guess what I'd say. Learn to go through and live life with your kids and walk through the doubts and the fears and all that stuff and reason together with them. And if you don't know answers, say, gosh, I don't know, let's figure it out. Let's watch a YouTube video together and then talk about it.
Yeah.
You don't have to have all those answers. You just know where to find them, and then boom, let's talk about them. It's not as hard to solve as we really think it is, because it happens in that power of community if we're willing to live it out. All right. Well, we're really at our close. Oh, we're 2 minutes over. Look at that. So, any last word?
Overtime.
I know. One last word from each of you guys, and then we're going to sign off.
Extra for the 2 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, man. She's getting it. She's fast. She's a fast learner.
I just say, we just need to get to work. That's what we need to do. We need to get to work. We need to continue to talk about these things and to challenge people and to challenge ourselves. And we just need to do it.
I think, it's just scary, but I think the more you do it, it's not scary at all.
Yeah, no, that's very true. You got to start somewhere. You might as well start with whatever's easy, and just sit down at the table and have your kids say, "Hey, kids, what's everyone talking about this COVID stuff?" And when they're back at school, or what is everyone saying about this news story? Right. Just start with a simple thing and just talk, and you'll figure it out as you go. Just don't be intimidated by it. It's a big deal. So, all right. Hey, we're going to go. We are going to be back for sure next Saturday. I also have a talk on Friday again with a guy who's a counselor, psychologist. We're going to talk about dealing with isolation and how we do that within the context of our world, the COVID world. And how do we use, how does this God and Scripture and the truth of Jesus Christ help us overcome this sense of isolation so it doesn't become depressing and angst-producing and stress-producing? So we're gonna that's gonna be on Friday, and then Saturday we'll have the roundtable thing going on again. So again, I'll have the archives up on the blog morethancake.org. After this, I'll have some links to all the articles and stuff that I read, all the quotes that I read from, and all the news stuff. Those will be linked from there. So if you want to check that out, it's morethancake.org. Probably about a couple hours from now once YouTube processes this thing, and I'll have the YouTube link there as well. So hopefully check it out. If I missed comments in the discussions, sorry. We're trying to do the best we can to monitor them. I'm still blaming Facebook. But hopefully one of us maybe will be on after. If we see comments, we'll try to address those things. So thank you guys for your time. Thanks for everyone for listening. And we'll be back very, very soon.